Okay, so the directions are asking me to measure 2 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide. So using my graduated cylinder, I'm going to measure 2 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide. And I need a little bit more. And there we have 2 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide. Now, I have to get a piece of liver, a piece of freshly cut up liver. I cut this up earlier today, bought a pound of liver from the grocery store. And I'm going to put a piece of liver into test tube number 1. I've labeled my test tubes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to put a piece into test tube number 1. And I'll probably have to push the liver all the way down to the bottom of the test tube with my stirring rod here. And let me turn the test tubes around so you can see them better. So here we have on the far right, this is test tube number 1. Okay, now the directions tell me to add the 2 milliliters of peroxide. I'm going to add the 2 milliliters of peroxide onto test tube, into test tube number 1, and we need to observe the reaction of what happens. Here we go. You can see that bubbles have formed, and the bubbles go almost all the way to the top, of the test tube. You can see there's some tape at the top of the test tube here, but the bubbles go about an inch, all the way to about an inch to the top. I'm also asked to feel the bottom of the test tube. Feel the bottom of the test tube to see if it feels warmer or cooler to the touch. And by doing this, I can figure out if this is an endothermic or an exothermic reaction. And when I feel the bottom of the test tube, I can feel that the glass of the test tube is a little warmer. Okay, so next I have to take test tube number 1. Again, this is test tube number 1. And I have to drain the liquid into test tube number 2. So right now I'm just draining the liquid, the used liquid, into test tube number 2. And I'm going to keep the liver in test tube number 1 for later. So right now, again, you can see I'm just draining the liquid from test tube number 1. I took the liquid from test tube number 1 and I poured it into test tube number 2. Okay, well now what? Now I'm going to take test tube number 2 and again, using my forceps, my tweezers here, I'm going to take a fresh piece of liver and I'm going to add it to test tube number 2. And we're going to check and see if there's a reaction. And again, I can use my stirring rod to push the liver all the way down. It kind of gets stuck. The liver is kind of sticky and fresh and raw, so I need to push it all the way down into the used liquid at the bottom. Almost there. There we go. And if I hold this up, you can see that there's no real reaction. This is test tube number 2. There's no reaction. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that observation in my data table.